Welcome to TriloTalk. This is a podcast dedicated to topics that we think are important to the profession of medical writing. And our goal is to bring these topical issues and ideas to the forefront and spark conversations in the medical writing community. Hi, everyone. This is Julia Forjanic Klapproth, Senior Partner at Trilogy Writing and Consulting, an Indegene company. Today, we're recording the third podcast in our series on medical devices and medical writing. And I'm joined again by Laura Collada, a Senior Medical Writing Manager at Trilogy, and Raquel Billiones, who is Director of Medical Writing and lead for medical devices and combination products. So welcome again, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so in this session, what we want to do is focus on in vitro diagnostics, or IVDs, and more specifically on companion diagnostics, which are sometimes referred to as CDXs. So Raquel, why don't we set the stage? Maybe you can just tell us, what are in vitro diagnostics?
Right. So again, just want to start with disclaimers. Everything here is my opinion and not reflecting those of my employer. So the key word is in vitro. IVD stands for in vitro diagnostics. In vitro, basically biological samples outside of the human body. So in vitro diagnostics are considered devices, and this would include tests, assays, even your blood collection tubes, but also software and machines used in the in vitro samples. Now, the funny thing is that medical writers deal with IVDs all the time in each and every clinical trial, in each and every document. They are all there in plain sight. We just don't realize it. So I will give you an example. The protocol, think about your schedule of assessments. You have there the hematology, the chemistry, urinalysis. These are all IVDs. Also your standard pregnancy test, but there are also, of course, more invasive IVDs like biopsies, as well as more novel biomarkers and genetic testing. So they all fall under the IVDs. Now, all these blood tests, they are all standard validated tests. They've been there for years, even decades. So in the EU, all these by default are CE mark, because this is a requirement in the EU that all these tests that we use in our clinical trials should be CE mark. However, if they are not, they will fall under what you call investigational device category. So, and there will be, examples will be like, as I said, I mentioned before, novel biomarkers, but also new genetic tests, as well as what Laura will probably talk more about, the companion diagnostics. So that's basically IVD in a nutshell.
So this just blows my mind, because the idea of taking a blood sample and considering that a device just seems odd. Is it considered a device because you're using a syringe, or is it considered a device because you're going to go away and do something to the sample?
So it's nothing to do with the sampling technique. It's something to do with the test. Although some of the sampling instruments are also considered devices, it's what you do with the samples. And basically, the key word in the EU regulation is that it has to have a medical purpose. So again, it's better to do it on an example. If you take blood samples, and the purpose is to make a diagnosis or make therapeutic decisions, that is a medical purpose. Therefore, they are considered devices in the EU. However, if you take a sample just because you want to know your genes and your genealogy for genetic purposes, that's not the medical purpose. So these basically the key here is it should have a medical purpose, and what is that purpose, and then it falls under the EU device regulations.
And so companion diagnostics are actually a subcategory of in vitro diagnostics.
Yes, exactly. So companion diagnostics belong to the group of predictive biomarkers, and they provide information to use a corresponding drug in a safe and effective manner. So pharmacotherapy is hampered, right, by patient variability. And this inability to predict the outcomes at an individual patient level is negatively affecting its value, right? But with progress in molecular medicine, we have a better understanding of the pathophysiology and the mechanism of action of drugs. And it is right here where companion diagnostics play a relevant role. Think, for example, of breast cancer and trastuzumab, right? So breast cancer can be treated with the monoclonal antibody trastuzumab, but only if by using a companion diagnostic device, we see that that individual is positive to the HER2 protein.
I guess this gets back to this whole idea of this being a device. It still seems strange to me.
Because we picture a device as some sort of a machine. But basically, this, when we say device, it's because of the EU regulation of IVDR, which stands for in vitro devices, in vitro diagnostics device regulation, and that is where it's all basically describe why they are considered devices. And it's a that's probably a totally other kind of podcast in itself. But when you look at the IVDR, basically, then it will be clear that these are devices, not your standard mainstream devices, but in vitro diagnostics devices.
It's the medical purpose that turns it into a device. So we do not need to think about something even tangible, right? Because also a software can be a device. So it's the medical purpose that turns the whole thing into a device.
I guess it's just, I'm always used to thinking of devices as a thing you're using to do something, right? This instrument of some kind. And now we're talking about companion diagnostics, which are a device as well. And it's something that you're developing together with the drug or the therapy, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, the key word is companion. The diagnostic test is accompanying the drug or the therapy. And if we talk about how they're being developed, basically, you see now there are two different products, but they're developed in parallel, and they even follow two different regulatory pathways, because then the companion diagnostics will be following the in vitro diagnostics device pathway, whereas the drug will follow the medicinal product pathway. And they should be basically developed in parallel, but they will undergo different let's say marketing authorization pathways through different health authorities. So the companion diagnostics will go through conformity assessment by a notified body for CE marking, whereas the drug will go through most likely the centralized procedure through the EMA. However, they need to be approved for market together, and they need to be cross-labeled. As Laura's example for breast cancer is, they should be cross-labeled. That this drug should only be used for this disease if they tested positive with the accompanying companion diagnostics.
It's interesting that you say that, Raquel. So if we think about the research phase, right? So before going into market, you may need 2 studies, 2 protocols. While one may think that having everything together could be an easier way to handle the data afterwards, right? Because you may want to pair the data. So what about that? Why do sponsors sometimes go for 2 separate studies and thus 2 protocols, one for the drug and one for the companion diagnostic? Why aren't they testing everything together?
So then it goes down to basically the strategy. And again, I'm focusing here from the EU perspective. Basically, yeah, you have a clinical trial, you're testing a drug and an IVD. That's considered a combined trial in the EU. It's a combined trial. And similar to what I mentioned before, for clinical trials, you also have to follow 2 different pathways. The device will be submitted for the device way, and the drug will be submitted in the drug way through CTIS. CTIS is centralized, whereas the devices clinical trials or clinical studies, it should say, are basically not centralized, but goes through the country level in the EU. So that is already complex. It can be that if you have one protocol, there might be a hitch or a delay depending on the pathway that you're going. And
Absolutely.
sometimes there is a strategy to basically just use a subpopulation of that big trial and just focus on, say, a population in 1 and 2 countries. That simplifies some things. And also take note, IVDs, they have different outcomes and endpoints that we are focusing on that might not be very important for the well, it's important for the drug, but you don't need to get into the detail, let's say, of sensitivity, specificity, precision,
Mm. Yeah,
lower limit of quantification, detection, and things that you don't see in a standard drug protocol. So that's why they basically try to separate. But on the other hand, the important thing is that they have to be done in the same population. Maybe the IVD is only a subpopulation, because at the end of the day, as you said, the data should be linked to each other. So it's a
exactly.
question of strategy.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
I would have thought that in this day and age that we might tend more towards sort of having umbrella type protocols where you have maybe a main protocol for the fundamental study that's going to assess the efficacy and safety of the drug, of the treatment. And within that, you have like a sub protocol that's assessing the diagnostic. And then you wouldn't need 2 separate studies, right?
Yeah, so that is one strategy. The issue is that in the EU, it's still not very defined how these strategies would work. But I just want to mention the combined initiative. The European Commission and the EMA are actually piloting this initiative, trying to centralize and harmonize the process. So right now there's a pilot. As far as I know, there are pilots going on, and we hope that it will be, that goes into the direction of, as you said, harmonize one protocol, one submission process, one pathway.
And what about in the US? Is there a similar lack of clarity with US regulations, or how is it there?
Similar to your mainstream devices, the US and the EU regulations are really very different. In a way, the US is probably simpler, although not that simpler, but because everything goes to the FDA, but yes, the different, what you call that, departments, right? Whereas in the EU, we really have 2 separate regulatory pathways, as I mentioned before already, the EMA or the country health authorities and the notified bodies. So so that's really the big difference between the US and the EU. Yeah.
Okay. So thinking about this now as a medical writer, what are the challenges in writing the submissions for these clinical diagnostics? Because it already sounds like it's a bit of a complex playing field.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are specific documents that we need to draft, like, for example, the performance evaluation plan, the performance evaluation report, scientific validation evaluation. So some of the documents are different and specific to these companion diagnostic devices.
Are these the same documents that you would need for traditional devices, though?
Some documents are very similar, but they have a different focus because we are talking about a device that's used in a lab, in a laboratory, right? So what changes a lot is the terminology due to this focus. So if we think, for example, of a document that is common all across clinical research, such as the study protocol, which for devices is called study plan. When we write for companion diagnostics, we do not talk about study sites, but we talk about study labs. And we do not talk about investigators. We talk about lab staff, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as always, the role of the medical writer in liaising and writing for all these stakeholders, lab personnel, clinicians, regulators, patients, is really prominent. Another challenge, I guess, is the speed of technological evolution as compared to the speed with which regulations are updated. And the message here is that these technologies evolve really quickly.
Yeah.
And medical writers, we do need to listen, understand, and then adapt our documents accordingly. So it often happens, right, that device technologies are developed and there may not be a regulation that addresses that very type of device or test.
Yeah.
So much like when a new type of pharmaceutical therapy is identified and then the regulators still do not have experience and thus cannot produce an opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I can imagine the technology is developing at light speed, right? And people are coming up with new ideas every day, and then they want to try and bring it to provide a new way of diagnosing something, particularly in cancer, right? And people won't yet know how to deal with that, how to manage that. What does that mean? What are the implications?
Well, exactly. I mean, sometimes devices and particular in vitro diagnostic devices can be developed really, really quickly. Think about all those COVID tests, right? They were right there hot. We didn't need to wait for years of clinical development. They were just there.
Yeah. That's a
And
really good example. And
very
approved very quickly.
for obvious reasons. So
yeah. But also I think we just want to mention what everybody else is very busy right now. The AI, the use of AI, artificial intelligence, it's also impacting the IVDs. I know that there are already AI tools out there used basically for diagnosis. It's already been approved. So again, this really underlines the quick evolution of the technology. Of course, I just would like to mention the device regulations in the EU is also basically linked to the AI Act in the EU as well, because they are really interlinked. And of course, EU CTR, right, the drug in the drug part in the EU.
Well, this is so fascinating, and I have to say this has been a really informative session for me. It never occurred to me that the diagnostic tests we do, you know, whether it's a biopsy or a urine sample or whatever it is, we're taking a bit of it out, we're looking at it, that would be considered a device and fall under regulation. But listening to what you were saying, Laura, about the different documents and the role that the medical writer plays, it seems that, like for any of the regulatory documents that we medical writers are typically working on, we always play that key role in helping guide the teams through the specifics of those required documents, flagging things up, making them aware of things they might not be thinking about, particularly when it's evolving so rapidly, right? And teams are just excited about bringing something to the market. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting area that medical writers clearly still have an important role in. I always really enjoy talking to both of you, and I learned so much about the device world that I just am not familiar with because it's not my space. So I appreciate you taking the time to dive into this with me today, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Laura.
Take care, both. Thank you for listening to TriloTalk today. If you have feedback you'd like to share, or if you have any ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, particularly something you think the community should be talking about, we would love to hear it. We would like this to be an ongoing conversation with medical writers at large, and you can send us your comments on our Twitter feed or our LinkedIn page. Just a reminder, you can find all our episodes of TriloTalk podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and trilogywriting.com/TriloTalk. Have a great rest of your day.